Welcome to another edition of the Wisdom Spot. I'm your co-host, Reverend Kevin Long, your co-host, Minister Jonathan Massburn, and Minister Corey Bennett. We are excited about today's show. We're going to talk about, after we watch this video, we're going to talk about why black people tend to vote Democrat and white people tend to vote Republicans. Very, very interesting video that Jonathan's picked out for us. And so, Jonathan, if you want to give us a little bit about the video, and then I'll cue it up and we'll jump in.
Yeah, so this video is by Phil Vischer, and it's titled, Why Do White Christians Vote Republican and Black Christians Vote Democrat? And obviously, one of the things we're trying to accomplish here on the Wisdom Spot is this idea of unity in the midst of diversity, right? We don't have to agree, but we're all part of one team in Christ. And one thing that the enemy will do is he will use our differences to wedge between us and to bring disunity. So that will cause us sometimes to demonize someone from the other side. It'll cause us to assume ill motives from someone on the other side. And when these things happen, we begin to see a wedge and a breaking in the body of Christ, which is frankly a tragedy. So we're going to watch this video, and then you're going to hear our opinions.
Why do white Christians vote Republican and black Christians vote Democrat? Everyone knows conservative Christians vote Republican. It's like one of the rules of nature. The sun comes up in the east and conservative Christians vote Republican. Unless they're black. Oh, right, most African Americans self-identify as Christian, and most African Americans vote Democrat. Look at the numbers. In 2016, 81% of white evangelical Christians voted for Donald Trump. For many Christians, it's just assumed the Republican Party is the party for Christians. But what about black Christians? Pew Research interviewed validated voters after the 2016 election, people they could verify actually voted. When they looked at black Protestant Christians, there is no official category for black evangelicals because most pollsters have decided evangelical is a white term, but that's a whole different video. When we look at black Protestant Christians, 96% voted for Hillary Clinton, the Democrat. 96%. So 81% of white evangelical Christians voted for Trump, and 96% of black Protestant Christians voted for Clinton. And it's pretty much like that in every election. White evangelicals vote Republican, and black Protestants vote Democrat. Why is that? Don't they read the same Bible, pray to the same God? Which group doesn't understand that they're voting for the wrong party? To make things even more confusing, if we go back to 1890, these guys were Republicans and these guys were Democrats. What happened? How did we end up where we are today? Well, let's go back and find out. In 1870, the 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. Since they had this guy to thank for it, and the brand new Republican Party, and since most Southern slave owners at the time were Democrats, almost all African Americans voted Republican. In fact, the first 23 black congressmen were all Republicans. Not all Southern Democrats were these guys, but enough of them were that newly enfranchised African Americans were not likely to vote Democrat anytime soon. Most Southern Democrats considered themselves conservatives. That sounds weird to hear. Everyone knows Republicans are conservative and Democrats are liberal. But the two parties didn't shake out so clearly on conservative and liberal until the 1970s and 80s. Conservative Southern Democrats look back in history to happier days, the glory days of the South before Abe Lincoln and those darn Yankees messed up everything. Those darn Yankees. I think that's a Disney film. But Honest Abe didn't last forever, as you may have heard, and things got messy for black Americans pretty quick. Republican presidents kept federal troops in the South to ensure African Americans could vote. But when the 1876 election was in a deadlock, with both parties claiming victory, America was in danger of falling into civil war again. A group of Northern Republicans and Southern Democrats met in secret and made a deal. Rutherford Hayes, the Republican candidate, would become president. In exchange, all federal troops, the ones protecting black rights, would be removed from the South. Yep, Northern Republicans sort of threw Southern black people under the bus. After the federal troops were gone, the guys in the pointy hats clamped down hard, and most African Americans now had a hard time voting for anyone. New Jim Crow laws stripped away many of the rights they had just won. So for many black people, the Compromise of 1877 felt like a betrayal at the hands of the Republican Party. Then comes the Great Migration. Living with these guys in charge wasn't much fun, to put it mildly, so millions of African Americans abandoned the South for jobs in new factories in northern cities like Chicago, Cleveland, and Philadelphia. And guess what? In the North, you could vote. Many transplanted African Americans still felt a loyalty to the party of Lincoln, but given the fact that no one in Washington was paying much attention to the needs of black families, the NAACP in 1926 argued that blacks should be loyal to neither party. Between 1868 and 1898, 22 African American representatives were sent to Congress from the South. After federal troops left, Bourbon Democrats' elimination of black votes was so complete that when Oscar DePriest was elected to Congress from Chicago in 1929, there hadn't been an African American in Congress for 30 years. Like all the black congressmen from the 19th century, DePriest was a Republican. And then the Depression. Black workers in northern cities were hit hard, with unemployment rates twice as high as white workers. Underwhelmed by Republican President Herbert Hoover's response to the crisis, Americans of all stripes, including African Americans, found hope in the progressive New Deal programs of Franklin Roosevelt, a Democrat. Roosevelt received overwhelming support from northern black voters. When the next African American candidate, Arthur Mitchell, also from Chicago, won a seat in Congress in 1934, he was something Washington had never seen before: a black Democrat. Over the next 20 years, African Americans continued voting for both Republican and Democratic candidates, and various civil rights measures were proposed by both Democrats and Republicans. Though today this seems hard to believe, there used to be conservative and progressive wings of both parties. In the Democratic Party, the progressives were northern urban Democrats. The conservatives were the Southerners, which, of course, included these guys. In the Republican Party, the progressives were folks like the liberally minded Rockefeller family. For years, to be a progressive Republican was to be a Rockefeller Republican. The conservative wing was made up of those who wanted the federal government to stay small and stay out of their business. Both conservative Northern Republicans and conservative Southern Democrats opposed the federal government getting bigger and launching more programs. So from the early days of Roosevelt's New Deal right up through the 1960s, a coalition of conservative Republicans and conservative Democrats managed to block just about every attempt at new civil rights legislation. In fact, between 1953 and 1965, more than 120 civil rights measures were considered by the Senate. Almost every one was killed by the Senate Judiciary Committee, a powerful committee at the time controlled by Southern Democrats and conservative Northern Republicans. As the years went by, many more of the new civil rights efforts were proposed by Northern Democrats and fewer by Republicans, motivating more black Americans to vote Democrat with regularity. Yet Southern Democrats were still stalling or blocking nearly every bill. The strain between pro-civil rights Northern Democrats and anti-civil rights Southern Democrats was reaching a breaking point, and that break would radically alter American politics. Meet Strom. Strom Thurmond ran for president in 1948 and served in the Senate from 1954 till 2003. Yes, that's a very long time. His career almost perfectly illustrates the shift in political parties over the last 80 years. Strom Thurmond was a Southern Democrat and governor of South Carolina in the late 1940s. He hadn't had a huge problem with Roosevelt's New Deal since Roosevelt didn't mess with segregation in the South. But when Roosevelt's Democratic successor, Harry Truman, integrated the Army in 1948 and proposed aggressive civil rights legislation, Southern Democrats like Thurmond had had enough. Thurmond and a group of Southern Democrats protested by forming the States' Rights Democratic Party, a conservative party dedicated to preserving segregation. Thurmond ran for president against Truman in 1948. A sample of his stump speech: "There's not enough troops in the Army to force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit the Negro race into our theaters, into our swimming pools, into our homes, and into our churches." No Negroes for me, thank you. That was pretty much it. Thurman lost to Truman badly, and his Dixiecrat Party, that was their nickname because States' Rights Democratic Party was a mouthful, the Dixiecrat Party disbanded. Thurman ran for Senate as a Southern Democrat and spent the next 20 years fighting to maintain racial segregation in the South. But the tide was turning against the segregationist Southern Democrats as progressive Northern Democrats and Rockefeller Republicans tried again and again to pass civil rights legislation. In 1960, with civil rights protests really heating up in the South, Northern Democrat John F. Kennedy won the White House. Kennedy was initially reluctant to take a strong stand on civil rights, fearing he would lose all Southern support for the rest of his agenda. But after watching attempts to integrate Southern universities end in violence, Kennedy spoke up. In a speech to the nation on June 11, 1963, Kennedy labeled civil rights a moral issue and promised a major civil rights bill to end discrimination against African Americans. 5 months later, Kennedy was assassinated. His successor, Lyndon Johnson, vowed to finish the fight for civil rights in honor of Kennedy. And, propelled by goodwill toward Kennedy and aided by progressive Republicans, Johnson was able to pass the raft of legislation that would end segregation in America. For segregationists like Strom Thurmond, the fact that Johnson, a Southern Democrat, had led the charge was the last straw. In 1964, Thurmond announced that going forward, he was a Republican. Over the next few years, segregationist Democrats like Thurmond jumped to the Republican Party in droves, and the South began shifting from blue to red. The identity of the Democratic Party as progressive was settling in, and a new wave of conservative Republicans was about to shift the brand there as well. The Republican candidate for president that year represented a new conservative turn for the party. Barry Goldwater was definitely not a Rockefeller Republican. He hoped to pick up disenfranchised Southern Democrats by opposing the Civil Rights Bill, and his message of states' rights and limited federal government sounded a lot like what segregationists had been saying for years. As a result, Goldwater won the Deep South, but failed in every other state except his home state of Arizona. 4 years later, Republican Richard Nixon tried again, appealing to white suburbanites frightened by scenes of urban riots on TV, with his message of law and order. Goldwater and Nixon were experimenting with a new Southern strategy, focusing on the newly christened Sunbelt states from Florida to California, and appealing to conservative white voters who felt the country was changing too fast and headed in the wrong direction. Nixon figured if he turned the South red, he could win the White House without needing to appeal to urban liberals or black voters at all. He was right. Fast forward to 1980. Ronald Reagan raised eyebrows by launching his presidential campaign in the Deep South with a pledge of support for states' rights. Critics took it as a coded appeal to Dixiecrats, the old states' rights party of segregationist Southern Democrats. The fact that Reagan launched his campaign and talked about states' rights in a Mississippi county best known as the site of the murder of 3 civil rights workers didn't help. Reagan's political and social conservatism built on Nixon's prior success and turned the South bright red. Between 1968 and 1988, the Republican Party had become the party of white, Christian, conservative America. And the Democratic Party was now the party of radical progressive leftists and hippies. Oh, and black church ladies. Right. About that. Black Christians are socially conservative. They're theologically conservative. So why aren't they politically conservative too? Black Christians and white Christians vote very differently, partly because their histories and life experiences are vastly different. When white Christians look at the Supreme Court, for example, they see the reason abortion is legal and school prayer isn't. But when black Christians look at the Supreme Court, they see the reason they can vote and pursue housing and employment without blatant discrimination. That difference in perspective has a huge impact on whether you see the federal government as part of the problem or part of the solution. Having the right to hear a Christian prayer in your local public school doesn't mean much if you're not allowed to attend your local public school. And think about the words progressive and conservative. A progressive believes things should be improved by making progress, by moving forward, by progressing. A conservative believes the good things we presently have are at risk of being lost and need to be conserved, or even revived from the past. So the best way to explain why white Christians vote for conservative candidates and black Christians vote for progressive candidates may simply be this. What do we see when we look in the rearview mirror? White Christians see a simpler time, when everyone went to church, when we prayed in school, when abortion was illegal and gender roles were clear. When black Christians look in the rearview mirror, the view is very different. They see fire hoses and church bombings and lynchings. They see Strom Thurmond saying, "We will never let Negroes into our theaters, swimming pools, homes, or churches." They see white Christians applauding Strom Thurmond for saying that, and then re-electing him to the Senate for 5 decades until he dies in office at 2003 at the age of 100. Is this beginning to make sense? There are other issues. Conservative white Christians see sin mostly as an individual problem, wrongs committed by one person against another, requiring only individual confession and repentance as the solution. Black Christians also see sin as a systemic problem, sinful systems needing broader solutions and broader confession and repentance. So to wrap all this up, it really doesn't help that we've only got 2 viable parties, and that we've decided one is for people who want things to change, and the other is for people who want things to stay the same. I'm oversimplifying, but you get the point. The Bible calls us to hold on to what is good, while also working toward what is best, to conserve and progress, and neither party lines up with that very well. But I hope at least now you understand how Christians from different backgrounds can read the same Bible, pray to the same God, and come to very different conclusions about who's going to get their vote.
Man, that was interesting. I knew probably maybe about 70% of it. There were some new things that were really interesting. What you guys think?
I thought it was extremely interesting, as a matter of fact. Just like you, I knew quite a bit of that, but did learn some new things as well. But it's pretty cool to see things from both sides of the coin, I suppose, or both sides of the coin, as well as Bob the Tomato can put it. So yeah.
Yeah, I learned a lot because I've not been educated on the experience of the African American through the history of America and through those political lens. So Strom Thurmond's a name that I've heard, but I couldn't tell you anything about, right? So to see how he was able to move from the Democrat Party into the Republican Party, and there was no pushback. They weren't like, we don't want you,
Right.
to see those things was really helpful because I think our shared experiences shape how, and that can be family experiences, not just our own, personal experience that shapes how we view the world. And the other thing I thought was really interesting is at the end, I think he hit the nail right on the head when we're looking at what are we trying to conserve, what are we trying to progress in. I think this is one of the areas that I see the biggest misunderstanding is, as a white Christian, there's things I want to conserve. Racism is not one of those things. There are things I want to progress, and race relations and seeing everybody as being created in the image of God. That's something I want to progress on, right? But I think there's oftentimes when I tell people I voted for Trump, they're going to think something very different. In fact, I had a lady from work show me a picture, and it was a Trump yard sign, and it had it was a meme, and on the top it had whatever thing, and then and it was the same flag, but it says a racist lives here. I understand now why she thinks that, even though it's incorrect.
What kind of flag was it?
It was a Trump flag. So it was basically saying the person who puts a sign in the yard is saying, I'm voting Trump. what she sees when she looks at it is that man's a racist.
Yeah.
Right. And we assume motive, we assume all these things. There's that wedge, and that person could be the least racist person there, but there's the enemy starts to make you assume things about someone based on who you vote for. And I think that's part of what we have to clean up as a community.
Let me jump in there because you just said something, and I want to talk about that. You said the least racist, and that term is I think we talked about like last week, where we throw around perception is reality when it's really
Right.
not. The least racist. So I would want to be if I were a white person, I would never want to be identified
As the least
as
racist
the as the most as the person the person that is the least racist. Like if you're looking at folk, I'm gonna always be. Trust me, I'll always be the least racist because I'm only a little bit racist. That's what that's what we kind of hear. Me, if I was a white, I would be. No, I'm either not racist or I'm anti-racist. I can't be the least racist if I were to be white, no having knowledge of my black experience. Because when we hear the least racist, we hear we hear racist. We don't hear like because to us there's not a most racist and a least racist. We just know a racist because we don't know the cop that's shooting, or and maybe that's a bad term, but it is our experience, or the person who would hang us. We don't know whether they're really, really, really racist or they were a little bit. And they were going with it doesn't matter. I still got hung. So I thought I would throw that out there because we heard Trump say that, and when he said that, he probably has no idea that you didn't say anything. You just told us that you were a racist, just not a real bad racist.
And that's a really interesting perspective because I was using that phrase in general almost as hyperbole, meaning the person is not racist.
Yeah.
So for me, it was synonymous, but that's really interesting that you would hear that and pick up something from that wasn't what I meant. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And good to know.
Yeah, I think me knowing you, I knew what I knew what you meant.
Right.
But when I heard it took me straight to Trump when he said it and how I felt when he said it. When he said it, I was like, oh, yeah, okay, well, interesting. The president is just a little bit racist. And he just told us on national TV. Yeah. I mean, that's I sidetracked
agree
this,
with you.
but
No, it's all good. Here's my thing as well. Sure, and I agree absolutely with you, Kevin. Perception is perception, and reality is absolutely reality. We got to stop giving perceptions as much credence as we do. I mean, we should respect them, but I'm kind of going off on a tangent. In regards to people making the unfair assumption that a person is a racist just because they vote for Trump. Yeah, I mean, it's unfair because I mean, you want to try to get to know everybody specifically and try to make sure that that person is not that, or try to get to know that person versus everybody else. But I'll submit to you this. I'll say that kind of like with, and maybe this is a poor example because I mean the Lord knew Lot's heart, but sure, Lot was not engaging in everything that happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. But at the same time, though, the fact that he was there, he kind of, a lot of people would lump him in with a lot of the things that were going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. So we got to be careful with that. I mean, people absolutely need to get to know people, period. But our human nature. We tend to try to lump things in order to try to make things, make things easier to to digest, or we kind of quick scan things. It's kind of like that ending speech of the Breakfast Club, in which, and yeah, I'm a millennial, but I've watched the Breakfast Club before. But with that ending speech of, yeah, you always try to um to make these generalizations about people because it's easy, and that's not fair. But at the same time, though, we also have to understand that it's that whole guilty by association thing. And when you're seeing all this stuff inundated on TV, you see all this stuff inundated on the internet, or you see, just like me, I'm currently in Mississippi right now. Uh, there was a person driving up the street with the Confederate flag on one side of his truck and the Trump flag on the other side of his truck, and just other obscenities on the truck and whatever. It's like, okay, well, it to some individuals it may be a little bit different to separate the two. So, and that's not to say that it makes them right, because it doesn't. Uh, a person could have a Trump sticker on their car, and they could be a fantastic person otherwise. But we just got to sit down and talk with folks. But at the same time, though, we have to understand that with those things, there are things associated with symbols and things associated with that person, and that's an unfortunate. It's an unfortunate reality. I don't know
Yeah,
if there's any
and I
way to
think
get away from that. I'm sorry.
and I think one thing to remember as believers, Jesus isn't on the ticket, right? No
Right.
matter who we vote for, we're going to be able to say this person's kingdom values in area A and B are consistent with the kingdom values in my heavenly constitution. But C and D, I'm going to have to hold my nose, right? And we're going to have to swallow it. But well, we believe it's unchristian to be silent on the sidelines because God gave us a voice and people died for that voice, right? So the difference between
Right.
someone who's willing to vote for a Republican and a Democrat isn't so much their opinion on any certain things, it's what issues are they prioritizing. So in the video, he mentioned it well. If you're looking at abortion, you're looking at religious freedom, that's what's on the mind of conservative Christians. I'm telling you that right now. If you go to any conservative Christian and say, why did you vote Trump? If abortion's not number one, it will be number two. And if it's not number two, it will be number three. It is up there. And that's something that we vote for. If you go to, I'm assuming here, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, if you go to an African American and say, why did you vote for Biden? They're going to have a whole different set of lists, and those two lists don't intersect. So it's the fact that we've prioritized one thing over the other. And guess what? Both positive priorities are true, and most likely both negative are true. But our life experiences cause us to value one over the other. And I think that's where the divide is. But once we stop demonizing somebody and saying, look, he's voting for Biden because he wants X, Y, and Z, I prioritize A, B, and C more, but I see where the man's coming from. Yeah, I think that's a really healthy place to be.
Mm.
I think, and you're 100% right, and um, I don't know. I am thinking what I'm tossing. So let me share what I'm tossing over in my mind. I'm tossing over in my mind. I get it. Okay, so if I were white and going to be a Trump supporter, and I was going to, and that was what I was going to. That was my motive for voting for Trump: abortion rights, and I'm trying to, with my makeup, it's hard for me to see that I would draw the line or that I would prioritize abortion rights
Mm-hmm.
over civil rights.
Agreed. Yeah.
Because to me, if it's lofty to, that's not a good term. I'm gonna take that term back. Um, I started to say I think that's a lofty idea to um, champion abortion, and then when I thought about it, I just kind of said that God had a lofty idea, and so yeah, and so that lofty wasn't the right term. I think that if we just name all of the things that as Christians, right? Knowing the history of suffering of a people, I don't think there's any more important ideology or subject matter when I think about Christians, and think about Jesus and interacting and the greatest commandment to love one another. I think the Bible and I mean when you in my mind the Bible talks to people that are here that are in giving us a guide for how to live life. Abortion is something that I think is a plain tenet in Scripture. It's not a. I think it's pretty plain, right?
Mhm.
And I see that issue as just. I would have to try to walk. Maybe I need to understand how it takes. How that is the most important issue, or an issue that say, yeah, well, that's why I voted for Trump, over and above the continued suffering and discrimination. And I mean, the racial issue is to me so much larger and encompasses
Right.
more of God's commandments that we're not fulfilling. Maybe help me walk me through that if you
Yeah,
can.
and this can devolve into a discussion on abortion real quick, and that's going to be an 8 hour discussion. So
I
I
know,
don't want
and
to.
I'm watching the clock because we got a couple. We're gonna have to pick
Yeah,
up next one,
um,
but
and maybe this is what we discuss next time. We certainly need to, but in the area of abortion, I see several primary issues by thinking that abortion is somehow a second tier from the suffering of people. If you believe consistently, like I do with Scripture, that the unborn are human beings, I think they're expecting over the next 4 years over 4 million abortions. That's a Holocaust. So when we look at the death and killing of 4 million people in the womb, that's a little bit more than, well, that's just an issue over there, but there's these people suffering over here. Well, there's 4 million people getting murdered over here, and these people got a shot because someone actually cared enough to let them out of the womb. So I think we have to make sure that when we're talking about abortion, we're talking about unborn human beings. And this is we may cut this out. You let me know.
yeah,
But one of the dangers we have in abortion, in particular, and I'd love to get your perspective and kind of noodle this through. We talk about abortion, those who are pro-choice, the same way that slave owners talked about slavery. Think about this. Government, we want state rights. This is my plantation. I want choice. If you don't want slaves, don't have them, but you have no right to come on my property and tell me I can't have slaves. What's going to happen to my family? What's going to happen to me? This is my livelihood. What's going to happen to you and all the things you're going to get from my plantation? This is my plantation and my rights. Now, what's the similarity between that and the "this is my body, leave me alone. This is my choice. If you don't want an abortion, don't get one." What's the similarity between those two views? We dehumanize the African American and we dehumanize the unborn person.
that's very
So
very rich.
so when
True.
I'm
But
looking at it, I'm thinking slavery, right? Like when I look at it, because parenthood locations are in areas that are primarily minority. Think of, I can't remember what the number was, but the tens of millions of African American children, had they not been aborted, think about what would happen to your voting voice. Those are the things I'm thinking when I'm thinking abortion, that is a direct tie to race relations.
Mm. Well, if I, do you mind if I
Bravo.
speak on that?
That was very,
Yeah.
you handled
Yeah,
that
please.
very well.
Yeah.
Because
May I,
you
may
made a
I
claim.
speak on that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry. I
you
was,
did.
I got
No,
excited.
no, it's all good. May I please speak on that?
Yeah, jump, man. You
Okay, so
cold just like us.
it's all good. I absolutely understand your point, Jonathan. It's a very well made point. But at the exact same time, though, when you're speaking of slavery, it's kind of to be completely honest. I kind of feel like I don't know, and I don't want to. Let me see.
Darn the devil.
Uh, Abortion is absolute. Say again.
You were breaking up, and I was like,
No,
darn the devil,
I
boy. He knows how to get right in there because we
I'm
hanging on.
sorry.
No, that's not you.
My
You
bad.
ain't the devil.
I,
I'm talking about the devil.
I'm just saying. So I feel you on the abortion thing because, like I said, those are human beings, and we're denying them an opportunity to live. Uh, but at the same time, though, depending upon the situation, I'm not making a case for abortion, but some of it is like, okay, I get it. My mother was in the situation to where it was either her or my sister living, and our baby brother was a literal baby. So between my sister's life and my mother's life, we had to choose. Now, unfortunately, thank the Lord, he spared my mother's life, but she was declared dead for a couple of moments. And I spoke to y'all about that before. But um, given the choice between the two, and it stinks that there's a choice between the two, or there had to be a choice between the two because there shouldn't be. Yeah, my mom, we would have rather my mom live, unfortunately. Uh, there are quite a few individuals who go through that, and the I'm just saying, in a particular instance, depending upon who you speak with and depending upon the situation, I'm pretty sure that some individuals, I'm not saying it all, I'm not trying to say that it's right. Some individuals would kind of find a decent enough justification for that. There is no decent justification for slavery at all. And I'm not saying that you're saying that there is a justification for it at all. That's not what I'm saying. Uh, there is none, and there's a lot of things that are packed up between slavery. Not only that, but then the whole systemic thing of it all. If we brought a lot of if let's just say 10 million, if the 10 million black children were spared from abortion, and that would have been a wonderful thing. Who's to say that that just wouldn't be 10 million more individuals who are uh, inundated with systemic oppression and racism? Once again, I'm not saying that abortion should have happened because it shouldn't have. I'm absolutely in agreement with you on that. But I kind of feel like there's a lot more to it than that. Maybe that's what I want to say. I think there's a lot more to it than that.
So let's do this. Let's pick up on our next episode. I think we want to. I think this deserves a little bit more discussion around this. I do want to get back to the video and talk about and really kind of discuss a little bit more about the now that we had that history and we got that history. How do we apply that knowledge or context with our Christian values in order to de-escalate some of the demonization on both sides? I think that's what we need to move towards in our next video. So
Agreed.
next episode, we'll do that. We're going to pick up, we'll reference the video and then pick right back up. Once again, thank you all, our listeners. Thank my co-hosts for your great research and input. Tune in next week, next episode of The Wisdom Spot. Thank you.